December 2014. A Korean air flight sits on the runway at JFK Airport. Suddenly, screaming erupts from first class. The aircraft turns around and heads back to the gate. The reason? A bag of macadamia nuts. The daughter of Korean Air's chairman demanded her nuts served on a plate. When a flight attendant handed them in a bag, she exploded. She forced him to kneel. She struck him with a tablet. She kicked him off the plane. This single moment exposed something far deeper. South Korea, a modern democracy, is being controlled by powerful family empires called Chaebols. How did these families gain such power? And why are they now breaking South Korea? Let's begin. Heather Cho, the daughter of Korean Air's chairman, boarded a flight from New York to Seoul. She took her seat in first class and waited for service. A flight attendant approached her with a packet of macadamia nuts. The nuts came in their original packaging, sealed in a bag. This triggered something in Heather Cho. She believed first-class passengers deserved their nuts served on a plate. The bag was an insult. She summoned the cabin crew chief, Park Chang-jin, to her seat. What happened next would become international news. Heather demanded the chief kneel before her. She struck his knuckles repeatedly with the edge of a digital tablet. She screamed at him in front of every passenger in first class. Then she fired him on the spot and ordered the plane to return to the gate. The aircraft, carrying 250 passengers, turned around. A hard-working employee found himself stranded in a foreign country because of a bag of nuts. Korean Air initially tried to cover the whole thing up. Executives ordered employees to delete records. They pressured victims to stay quiet about what happened. But the truth came out anyway. When Park Chang-jin heard that Heather Cho was spreading false rumors about him, he decided to go public. He filed an official complaint. Passengers corroborated his story. Audio recordings emerged of Heather screaming at airline staff. The incident sparked national outrage. South Koreans gave it a name that captured their frustration perfectly: Gapjil. This Korean term describes the arrogant abuse of power by those in authority. The nut rage incident became the symbol of everything wrong with South Korea's corporate culture. Heather Cho received a 12-month prison sentence for obstructing aviation safety. She served 5 months. The light punishment only fueled more anger. People asked, why do the children of wealthy families face such minor consequences for such major offenses? But here is the troubling part. Heather Cho's behavior represented something much larger than one bad executive having a terrible day. Her sister, Emily Cho, threw a drink at an advertising executive during a business meeting in 2018. Their family's airline empire represents just one piece of a massive puzzle. South Korea operates under the control of a handful of elite families. These families run giant business empires called Chaebols. Samsung, Hyundai, LG, SK, Lotte. These names power nearly half the entire South Korean economy. They build the phones in your pocket, the cars on your streets, the ships in your harbors. The nut rage incident pulled back the curtain on a system where power flows to a chosen few. Accountability disappears for the privileged, and ordinary workers suffer the consequences. The story of South Korea's Chaebols begins in the ashes of war. After the Korean War ended in 1953, South Korea lay in ruins. Factories stood destroyed. Roads crumbled. The economy barely functioned. Leaders faced an impossible challenge: rebuild an entire nation from scratch. The government adopted a strategy called import substitution. They wanted Korean companies to make Korean products for Korean people. Foreign businesses stayed out. Local entrepreneurs got their chance to build something. Samsung started during this era. The founder began by refining sugar and manufacturing wool textiles. Other future giants planted their seeds in similar humble beginnings. Progress came slowly at first. Competition existed. Multiple companies fought for market share. Then everything changed in 1961. General Park Chung-hee seized control through a military coup. He looked at South Korea's economy and felt dissatisfied with the pace of growth. Traditional capitalism moved too slowly for his vision. He wanted rapid industrialization, and he wanted it immediately. Park developed a partnership model that would reshape South Korea forever. His government would create 5-year economic development plans. Then they would funnel massive resources into a select group of conglomerates to execute those plans. Imagine the United States government deciding that only Tesla, Exxon, and Microsoft would receive all investment funding. Every other business would struggle while these chosen companies thrived. That essentially describes what Park created in South Korea. The government nationalized commercial banks. This gave them complete control over who received loans. Want money to grow your business? You needed government approval, and the government had already decided which companies deserve support. Chaebols received subsidies that competitors could only dream about. They got exclusive import licenses while rivals faced barriers. Tax breaks flowed their direction. Foreign competition found themselves blocked at the border. These policies created business on easy mode for the selected families. The results looked spectacular at first. South Korean exports exploded from $55 million in 1962 to $835 million by 1970. A 16-fold increase in under a decade. GDP per capita climbed from $106 to $279, then skyrocketed to $13,000 by 1996. South Korea transformed from a war-torn wasteland into an economic miracle. The Chaebols stood at the center of this transformation. They built ships, manufactured electronics, constructed buildings, and exported goods around the world. But something darker grew alongside the economic success. The families running these empires focused on political connections more than operational efficiency. They diversified into random industries with little strategic thinking. A company making electronics might suddenly enter the hotel business, then construction, then finance. Most dangerously, they accumulated enormous debt. Government support meant banks would always lend them money. Guaranteed loan repayments meant zero consequences for risky borrowing. The concentration of economic power created a situation where a handful of companies controlled nearly everything. By the 1990s, these giants had become too big to fail and too important to regulate. The families at the top operated with virtual immunity from accountability. The flaws in the Chaebol system revealed themselves spectacularly in 1997. The Asian financial crisis swept through the region like a wildfire. South Korea's economy buckled under pressure. The cracks that had been forming for decades finally split wide open. The top 30 Chaebols carried average debt-to-equity ratios approaching 600%. To understand how extreme this number sounds, compare it to the current S&P 500 average of around 60%. South Korean conglomerates had borrowed 10 times more than healthy companies typically carry. Between July 1997 and June 1999, 11 of the 30 largest Chaebols collapsed entirely. The biggest failure came from Daewoo Group, which imploded with nearly $80 billion in unpaid debt. At that time, this represented the largest corporate bankruptcy in history. The head of Daewoo, Kim Woo-chong, fled the country and left ordinary taxpayers holding the bag. He would later return to South Korea and receive a pardon for his crimes. International organizations and the IMF arrived with a rescue package. They had conditions attached. They wanted increased managerial accountability. They demanded financial transparency. They insisted on better corporate governance. The international community believed that opacity in the Chaebol system had caused the crisis. They wanted reforms that would keep the conglomerates from operating with unchecked power. Fast forward to today, and those reform efforts look like a joke. Since the rescue package, scandals have piled up relentlessly. Samsung faced charges for tax evasion and bribery on 3 separate occasions. SK Group encountered embezzlement and corruption charges twice. Hyundai generated headlines countless times for slush funds and bribery. Hanwha faced embezzlement charges. Lotte dealt with corruption and bribery allegations. The list stretches on and on. In almost every case, charges eventually disappeared. Executives paid fines instead of serving time. Courts suspended sentences. Presidents issued pardons. South Koreans developed a cynical saying to describe this pattern: the 3-5 rule. A wealthy executive receives a 3-year prison sentence that gets suspended for 5 years. In practice, this means they serve 0 days behind bars. The Transparency International Corruption Perceptions Index in 2024 scored South Korea at 64 out of 100. The country ranked 30th among 180 nations. This places South Korea in a moderate position globally, but the Chaebols system creates unique challenges that numbers struggle to capture. Samsung heir Lee Jae-yong faced conviction twice for bribery in a massive scandal that brought down President Park Geun-hye in 2017. The president received a 25-year prison sentence. Lee Jae-yong, he got pardoned in 2022 and now runs the company. This pattern repeats with disturbing consistency. Presidents go to prison. Executives get pardoned. The system protects its own. The influence of Chaebols extends far beyond what most people realize. Compare South Korea's economic concentration to the United States. The top 30 companies in South Korea account for 77% of total GDP. In America, the top 500 companies account for 66% of GDP. That means each major Korean company carries 26 times the economic weight of each major American company. 5 Chaebols alone represent roughly half of South Korea's entire stock market value. Samsung contributed 23% of the country's GDP in 2024 by itself. These numbers reveal an economy balanced on a knife's edge. Employment statistics tell an even more troubling story. In America, approximately 58% of workers find employment at companies with over 300 employees. In South Korea, this number drops to 14%. A small number of companies control the market, while only a small portion of the population benefits from working at them. This creates an inverted pyramid of privilege where opportunity flows upward to the few. Small and medium-sized enterprises face crushing pressure under this system. With so few large companies dominating the market, smaller businesses have limited options for customers. This hands enormous negotiating leverage to the Chaebols. Consider what happened after Hyundai acquired Kia. The combined company controlled between 70 and 80% of the domestic automobile market. They used this dominance to squeeze suppliers relentlessly. Hyundai forced suppliers to work exclusively for them. They demanded access to supplier cost structures, allowing them to compress margins further. Worst of all, they studied supplier technologies so they could copy them and eventually cut out the original innovators. Samsung demands detailed technical disclosures before signing contracts. This allows them to absorb innovations and eliminate the smaller companies that created them. Lotte pressured small suppliers to participate in promotional events at their own expense. These practices follow a certain logic. Consolidation benefits those at the top. As investor Peter Thiel often says, monopolies give you the power to call all the shots. Once you dominate a market, competitors and suppliers must accept your terms. The Chaebol families understand this perfectly. They've built an economy where their dominance becomes self-reinforcing. International investors recognize what's happening. Foreign money tends to avoid South Korean markets despite attractive fundamentals. Investors understand that Chaebol families prioritize their own interests over minority shareholders. This creates what analysts call the Korea discount. Korean stocks trade well below Japanese and Taiwanese peers with similar financial metrics. The Korea Composite Stock Price Index trades at a price-to-book ratio of just 0.78 times, near a 20-year low. Between 2014 and 2023, Korean companies traded at merely 58% of average valuations in advanced economies. If Samsung traded at the same multiples as its global rivals, its value would roughly double. The discount exists because investors understand they face disadvantages when dealing with family-controlled empires. Chaebols engage in complex related-party transactions that harm outside shareholders. They might force a well-performing company to purchase a struggling company at inflated prices, enriching the family while destroying value for everyone else. The families even benefit from low stock prices in some ways. South Korea's inheritance tax reaches an effective rate of 60% for company owners. Low valuations and opaque ownership structures help them minimize tax liabilities when passing wealth to the next generation. Young South Koreans face a brutal reality in this economic landscape. The country boasts one of the highest tertiary education rates in the world. Students spend years preparing for grueling college entrance exams. They sacrifice their youth for academic achievement, believing education will open doors to prosperity. Then they graduate and discover those doors remain locked. South Korea has one of the highest youth unemployment rates in the developed world. Over 1.2 million young people struggle to find work despite holding impressive credentials. Youth unemployment climbed to 5.5% in late 2025, with some measures showing rates above 10% for those in their 20s. The Chaebols system creates this paradox. Everyone dreams of working for Samsung, Hyundai, or another major conglomerate. These companies offer higher pay, better benefits, and social prestige. Parents push their children toward these goals from childhood. But these companies employ only a tiny fraction of the workforce. Together, the 64 largest Chaebols account for over 84% of GDP, while providing only 10% of available jobs. The math simply fails young people trying to build careers. Average pay at small and medium enterprises runs about 50% of what Chaebol employees earn. This wage gap makes smaller companies deeply unattractive to graduates who invested years preparing for elite careers. Many young Koreans face a choice: accept positions they consider beneath their qualifications, or remain unemployed while waiting for another chance at a Chaebol job. Most choose to wait. As a result, over 5% of Korean youth find themselves classified as NEETs, meaning they hold no employment and receive no education or training. The NEET rate runs especially high among university graduates. A stunning 45% of Korean NEETs possess tertiary degrees, compared to just 18% across other developed economies. These represent highly educated, capable individuals stuck in unemployment because the system offers them so few paths forward. Meanwhile, small and medium enterprises face severe labor shortages. Nearly 40% report difficulty finding workers. Young people would rather remain unemployed than accept positions at smaller companies, hoping their patience will eventually pay off with a Chaebol offer. The transition rate from small companies to large companies hovers below 3%. This means waiting rarely works. But young people keep hoping anyway because the alternative feels like giving up on their dreams entirely. Recent data paints a grim picture. The number of young graduates unable to find work for 6 months or longer reached a 13-month high, crossing 35,000 people. Youth satisfaction in South Korea falls below 20%, lower than most developed nations. A stunning 60% of young Koreans believe they have minimal chance of improving their economic situation. Research shows that parental income drives educational outcomes more than student potential. Wealthy families can afford better test preparation. Their children gain admission to top universities at twice the rate of everyone else. Since Chaebols hire almost exclusively from elite universities, economic privilege perpetuates itself across generations. The fundamental problem with South Korea's Chaebol system comes down to entrenchment. When large systems become deeply embedded in society, they grow simultaneously too big to fail and too fragile to fix. The Chaebol system has reached this stage completely. Politicians who campaign on reform face devastating consequences. Chaebols wield enough power to crush political careers and make candidates unemployable outside government. Law firms that pursue cases against these companies find themselves cut off from major clients who generate the bulk of legal revenue in the country. Universities risk losing funding from the largest donors if professors publish critical research. News organizations that investigate Chaebol wrongdoing threaten their own market access. Workers themselves often resist reform efforts. They worry that weakening the Chaebols might send South Korea into economic decline. Samsung builds phones that compete with Apple. Hyundai makes cars that sell worldwide. Breaking these companies apart feels like diminishing Korean identity. The government introduced initiatives like the Corporate Value Up program to encourage better corporate governance. The catch? Participation remains completely voluntary. Presidential scandals demonstrate the system's self-protective nature repeatedly. President Park Geun-hye went to prison after a corruption scandal involving Samsung and other chaebols. President Lee Myung-bak faced similar charges. Former President Moon Jae-in was indicted in 2025 on corruption allegations. When Samsung's leader sits in prison, authorities grow nervous about investor confidence and national competitiveness. The most recent political crisis arrived in December 2024, when President Yoon Suk-yeol declared martial law. Facing corruption investigations and deteriorating authority, he attempted a desperate power grab. The incident resulted in his impeachment, continuing South Korea's pattern of presidential scandal. Every administration seems trapped by the same dynamics. Leaders need chaebol cooperation to maintain economic stability. Chaebols need government protection to maintain their advantages. Ordinary citizens remain caught in the middle, watching presidents fall while business families thrive. South Korea represents what happens when monopolies take root, when family wealth and power go unchecked across generations. The chaebols control factories, roads, ports, banks, law firms, and government policies. Their heirs inherited wealth and power without building anything themselves. They received gold spoons at birth and macadamia nuts served on silver plates. And somewhere, a flight attendant who once served nuts in a bag instead of on a plate still remembers the price he paid for crossing the wrong family. The cabin crew chief who stood up to Heather Cho reported being demoted to cleaning toilets after the incident. South Korea's economic miracle grew from determination, sacrifice, and brilliant engineering. The talent exists, the work ethic exists, the ambition exists. What remains missing is the will to challenge those who benefit from the current arrangement.